Hello, thanks for joining us today and welcome to this HRD webinar. For today's session, we are thrilled to be partnered with Olio, the innovation leader in recruiting enablement technology. Over the course of the next hour or so, we'll be looking at the changing talent acquisition landscape and how becoming part of the data revolution could be the answer. We'll be diving deep into the impact of datafication in recruitment, how it could help to hire smarter and fairer, and why in today's problematic climate it is needed now more than ever. We will also have a poll in today's session, so make sure you've got your mouses at the ready so you can get involved in that. And as always, we'll be holding a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so do make sure to keep your questions coming in throughout, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. So without any further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome your speaker for today's session, Janette Meester, Managing Director at Olio. Janette, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Hi, everyone. I'm Janette Meester. I'm so excited to be with you guys today. I thought what I would do was just give you just a quick background on myself. So as Sam said, I head up Americas for Olio, Managing Director. I've been here for actually over 7 years, but I think the one thing that when I talk to a lot of people that they appreciate is before I joined Olio, I actually was a practitioner like many of you on today's session. So I was in both regional and global talent acquisition roles at Lehman Brothers and Credit Suisse, and a number of other organizations. And then I decided that I loved Olio and the technology so much to make a switch. But I come to you today really wearing the hat of me as a customer of many years and a practitioner. So hopefully that's helpful as we go through today's session. I will also warn you that I love data and stats and metrics, and so I definitely will have that sprinkled throughout today's session. So without further ado, this is our agenda. And, I'm going to run you through sort of the gamut. I will leave time the end for questions, as Sam had said. And if you have questions, you can feel free to type them in the Q&A. And so, we, depending on maybe they'll get thrown at me in the interim. So with that, I thought what would be helpful is to start this off with a poll. And I like the poll because I want to, hear what you are going through. It's an interesting time, lots of challenges. And so here, and hopefully everyone should be able to see, there's a poll question. And my question for everyone on today's session is, what are your top recruiting challenges? And hopefully everyone can see that. And you can check more than one. So, some people in organizations are really focusing on attracting the right candidates. Others are at organizations where hiring has not slowed down and you're hiring at really high volumes and it's pretty intense. So I'm curious how many of you are on the, today's session, or are you really focusing on recruiter efficiency? Or again, opposite of high volume, you really need to keep those candidates engaged during, again, this interesting time period that we're all in. Or are you redeploying your workforce and dealing with internal mobility? You can be dealing with more than one. I probably should have had an other option, but, you have your 5 choices. You can select more than one if you haven't already. And I'll just give you guys a few more seconds, and then we can see who's on. And what I will try and do throughout the sessions is depending on, who we have on today's session, I will try and, maybe spend a little bit more time as I go through today's content on, what the biggest challenges are. So with that, I'm going to, I think, switch over and go through the poll results. Hopefully I give everyone enough time to answer. And let's see. I'm clicking over and waiting to see. And I don't see anything yet. So I'm going to click again and see if the technology works. I will say that I am in a household with many other people, and I've told them that they can't play Fortnite or anything of that nature. I have a few other children in the house, so maybe that is the issue. So let's see. I don't know if any of my other colleagues can see or if it's switched over or if it's just me. If anyone else can see the poll results. Otherwise, I will just maybe switch to the next slide, and you guys might be able to see, and I can't. Let's see. Try this one more time. Otherwise, we'll just keep on going. Let's see. I don't see anything. Let's see. Okay. It looks like I'm hearing that people have moved it themselves. Oh, there they are. Okay. Awesome. Cool. So it looks like the majority of those on today's call, attracting the right candidates, is the main issue, followed by improving recruiter efficiency. Only a few of you, just 9%, are having the high volume piece, and about a third engaging. So so attracting the right candidates, that's not surprising. I'm just going to go to the next slide. I've done this presentation. Rather not this poll a number of times in the past month or so, and that is tending to be most recently the number one challenge. So I'm going to the next slide. I think I'm having a little bit of an issue with my tech and my wireless here. So if someone on the line can just progress to page 7 for me, that would be amazing. And I'm just going to, until I catch up, just ask someone just to go through the next slide. So everyone should be seeing the recruiting is more challenging than before slide. And listen, we know that. It's been, as I had mentioned, we are living in a historic environment. There's new norms. There's economic uncertainty. There's fear. I mean, listen, life is crazy. And, with that, obviously, we're dealing with, uncertain workforce needs. And as I mentioned, depending where you sit, there's about 10% of you on today's call where it's crazy. You are hiring like crazy. And presumably the other, 90%, you're in that slowdown or hiring freeze. And so there is that distinct difference. Some of you might have actually part of your business where it's actually growing really fast. The other parts are slowing down. So there's a lot of, a lot of change happening. And one thing I will say that has not changed over all of the years I've been doing this is overburden recruiters. I mean, I started in recruiting, I'm going to date myself, 20 years ago. And, recruiting functions are always overburdened, and it's a tough job. But obviously the big change is we've moved from, a candidate-led environment to, over the past number of months, really an employer-led one. And it's, with all that, there's a lot of burden on the recruiters regardless. I do also want to mention a piece around diversity and inclusion. And when all of this started, there was a big fear with all of the efforts we've made in diversity and inclusion from a recruiting standpoint sliding backwards. And in fact, if we look back in April, there was, reports where U.S. unemployment is rising faster for women and people of color. There was also a similar study that came out in the Daily Telegraph from the IFS. They had reported that British moms were more than, or almost 50% more likely to have lost their jobs. So there was a lot of that fear of sliding backwards with stats to back it up. I want to mention now the latest piece in the past, number of weeks is, me, I sit in the U.S., is really, around Black Lives Matter. And I think this is really, really super important because it's putting the focus on an area that is so incredibly critical for all of us. And us and, talent acquisition, we can really help and move the needle here. And it is so critically important. So, with this whole social movement, it's nice that we're not, it's more than nice, but we're not taking that step backwards. We are moving forward in a good way. So that's, the context of where we're at. If I go to the next slide, which again, my system is not updating. We have a report on that we just published with Aptitude Partners. And for those that don't know, Madeline Loreno, she is an incredible research analyst that focuses really on talent acquisition. She's been doing this for over 12 years, and she works with a lot of large enterprise companies, and she speaks at conferences around the world. She was actually just in Paris before everything shut down. And so we partnered with Madeline. We published this report recently focused on large enterprise. So throughout the presentation, I'm going to share findings from the research report. There's a link at the end where everyone can download it if they'd like to, if they want to get to the details. But pretty much any stat, unless I say otherwise, is from is literally from this report. So that's that. And then if we just go to the next slide, and I'm also seeing my tech friends are telling me to like refresh and try my page, so I'm going to try that at the same time. But we should be on the next slide. So the other thing I wanted to do is just give you guys a quick update on recruiting enablement and the definition, because this is a term that I'm going to be using throughout the presentation, and it might be new to some people. And so a lot of, if we take a step back and look big picture, a lot of enterprise organizations leverage sales enablement practices to be more effective at reaching customers and hitting their sales goals. And according to research conducted by CSO Insights, if you have an effective sales enablement function, it leads to 2-digit improvements for quota attainment and win rates versus organizations that don't have sales enablement. And so, if you had a way to, close candidates immediately and, win them over your competitors, I mean, you'd want to do that. And so, we believe at Olio, and, we really focus on this recruiting enablement piece, because you can, apply the same principles of sales enablement to talent acquisition. And so if an organization, can really leverage a recruiting enablement practice, they are going to see improvements in efficiency and quality. And the key here, and I'm going to get into this with the data, is about taking the guesswork out of talent acquisition and allowing you, your teams, and your organizations to use data and your insights to drive success. And so that's really critical. So that's how we define recruiting enablement. And if I go on to the next slide, and to just my tech friends, I'm going to refresh. I'm just going to move myself in a minute. I'm trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. But if I look at the difference between reactive recruiting and recruiting enablement, is that, listen, I was doing recruiting for so many years, and I'm with my customers all the time. The reactive recruiting, these challenges are so common to many recruiting leaders. We are reactive at times. It is what it is. I've been there. But with recruiting enablement, it can really resolve a lot of these challenges at the highest level. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delve into more of that as I go through the talk. So just on the next slide, 63%, when we did the survey, sorry, I'm just going to reference it. When they did the survey with Madeline, she found that 63% of talent acquisition leaders said the quality of hire is the greatest challenge. But I want you to keep in mind that more than 80% also say the quality of hire is a recruiting metric, not a hiring manager metric. So as a result, what you have here is that you have all of us as talent acquisition leaders, we're being held accountable for what happens beyond when a candidate accepts an offer. But there's no standard around measuring the quality of hire, and talent decisions typically, we know, they typically are based on gut rather than data and insight. But there's good news here, okay? So if I just go on to the next slide, the good news is that 72% of enterprise companies say using data to automate recruiting decisions is a priority. So that's good, and this matters because Madeline also found that companies that use data to automate decision-making are twice as likely to improve the quality of data. So again, we have a good news, bad news, thing here. But again, we got to, focus on the good news. So if we go on the next slide, I want to just take a minute to talk about protecting the candidate experience. So even if, listen, we know a majority on this call, you're slowing down hiring or maybe it's already frozen, it's so critical to continue to nurture candidates in a way that's specific to the candidate type. And it's so important from a future-proof standpoint. And I know, listen, we said that was one of our big challenges here. So let's talk a little bit about that. And if I go on to the next slide, listen, it's never been worse than before to have a one-size-fits-all approach to recruiting. So I literally just read the slide, but it's so incredibly true. And so let me just talk about that for a minute. It's so important to tailor your process to different roles, profiles, or situations or markets. And obviously, it's really important to consider more than your usual pool of candidates from a diversity standpoint. And it's important not from just a diversity and inclusion standpoint, but also for different types of roles that you're hiring for. So I want you to think about, it's not just who you hire, it's how you hire. So I want you to think about content and diversity and inclusion. And if I go on to the next slide, it's really about driving better outcomes through process. So tailoring is really key. And I said before, avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. So let me give you some examples to try and bring this to life. Top talent. You may have some top talent roles. They're really hard to fill. And it's really, really important to build stronger relationships, make it very personalized. And especially when you have hiring freezes, these are the candidates that, if they've applied to something, you want to pick up the phone and talk to them. Obviously, in addition to email, really, really personalize that. But this is a very different process than, let's say, if you're recruiting seasonal workers. And I'll give you one example. One of our customers, Marks and Spencer's, they take 5 minutes to rehire a former employee. And this is really critical for them, especially during different holiday seasons and whatnot. So someone, again, just apply 5 minutes. Obviously, very different process than a top talent. Similar to a term I've started hearing a lot is a lights out role. So if you think of a role, and you may have some of these in an organization that don't require a face-to-face interview, this occurs a lot in distribution type roles like drivers. So you could think of an application process for drivers where, all you really need to know what competencies that, you need is, does that person have a driver's license? Do they have any driving criminal offenses? And that could be it. 2 questions, like straight on hire, get the offer right there online, versus obviously if you're hiring for an executive role, very, very different. So hopefully that brings that to life. And then the other piece that I want to talk about is qualified versus unqualified candidates. And this is really important for those in organizations, particularly where you have a brand, a consumer brand, and you may have candidates who love your company, and it's really critical to let them down easy to protect your brand. This is really simple to automate through technology. And so you want to let the unqualified down easy so it protects the brand, so they'll want to buy or, whatever business you're in. But for those who are qualified, you want to have a really different experience. You want to quickly pinpoint those top qualified candidates and then fast track them to give your team more time to build relationship with them. And you have to ensure it's personalized. And you can do that to an extent through technology and automation. So think about this. You could have one role, but 4 different variations through digital stories. So you could have content that comes up as someone starting to look and apply, and it could be cut by gender, generation, geographies, or even ethnicities, just as an example. We can come up with all different types of roles. But again, same process, because that's really an important piece from a compliance standpoint, but different stories to engage those top candidates. So if I go on to the next slide, and just to my friends in tech who I know are supporting me in the background, I'm trying to relaunch, and it's not really working. So I'm on the side that's lifting the administration burden. Here's the piece. Talent acquisition professionals must handle both tactical and strategic aspects of their jobs. And then also when I ask recruiters how, they spend their time, and there's been surveys, and Madeline did this as well, is, the majority of time is on admin stuff. It's scheduling interviews and calls. It's searching for candidates in your ATS, scheduling time with, hiring managers. Those are always at the top of the list. There's a lot of admin. But let's be honest. You aren't hiring your recruiters for admin skills. I didn't hire my recruiters, for admin skills. I am hiring them, and we should all be hiring them for the recruiting skills. And I like to think of recruiting skills as being strategic, engaging and closing the right candidates. I like to say that fun stuff, that piece that you cannot automate through technology. That's the really critical stuff. The rest, technology and automation can take rid of it. So if I go into the next slide, does this feel like your day sometimes? You're fighting fires. This was for me in my recruiting teams. It was constantly, and it's interesting. On average, there's 91 steps in a recruiting process. It's a huge admin burden. And let's just bring to life, this through scheduling interviews. It's such a good example of, fighting fires. Madeline found that on average, a recruiter spends 16 hours a week on scheduling. And what's interesting is it was also found that almost 60% of large enterprise organizations hired full-time schedulers to deal with it. And what's funny as well, as I think about from an opportunity standpoint, only 20% of organizations are using automation to help. So if you think about it, there's this huge problem, and there's so much room for improvement here. And I think this is even more funny to me because literally 20 years ago, literally in the year 2000, I was at Lehman Brothers as a graduate recruiter, and this was our issue. We literally hired some people to help us schedule interviews. This issue has been going on for 20 years. So now 20% of organizations are starting to automate this, which is amazing. But they're I feel like this is something we can take care of this year. This could be a bright spot in, this crazy year of 2020. So, that's my, piece, for example, of, where you can automate. And if we just go to the next slide, other ways to overcome some of these admin issues is I thought what I would do is just, show you some automations that some of our Olio customers are using to enable more efficient recruiting. And I do want to say, by the way, there's two types of automation in my mind. There's data-driven automation, and then there's what I would call templated automation. And both are really good and have their place. And so here I have listed a sample of both. And interestingly, on a poll I did, I think it was probably 3 weeks ago now. I know all of us sort of were like, what day is it? What week is it? But it was about 3 weeks ago. And I did a poll, and posting to job boards was the number one automation being used by far. And, listen, I know talent acquisition professionals and leaders, we face intense pressure to handle both the tactical and strategic aspects of our jobs. And so, again, I said before, but I'll just repeat it, is that, recruiting enablement can automate these tactical tasks. And, we can create workflows and let recruiters focus on that fun stuff, like creating more value to the organization, and, connecting with people, both whether it's internally or externally. So again, hopefully this gives you, a bit of a flavor. So I also want to just, go, if we go to the next slide, and I just talk a little bit about high volume recruiting. And this has been a challenge for some companies. And it sounds like, again, we have some people on today's webinar that are handling that as well. And, in today's environment, companies in many different industries, they have to think about filling positions much more efficiently and managing a large number of applicants. And, what I would say is these companies really need to think about a shorter recruiting process and how, automation can help lift that admin burden. So, I know I've talked to lots of different people and across different companies, and, at times they're throwing out or ignoring half of their applicants because of the volumes. And so, I'd say to you, think about it. Are you doing this? Are you disregarding any applicants because of the volume? You may not have really, at this point, maybe a lot of openings, but are you getting tons of applications because of where we are right now, and are you ignoring them? And, recruiting enablement can really help with this volume issue. We talked a bit about automating and tailoring workflows, for different, roles and what you're doing. And you can also use AI to attract the right candidates and root out bias. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And you can also use analytics to score and fast-track top candidates. And so, me really being able to see and get through all those applications and ensure you're really, giving everyone a fair shake is so important. Just don't let it be that black hole. And so if we go on to the next slide of hardwiring D&I into recruiting, I just want to talk about that for a minute. And I'm just seeing, I'm just looking to see if everyone's okay adjusting the slides for me, because clearly my computer is not cooperating. So to my tech friends, I'm on the slide that literally says hardwiring D&I into recruiting. I'm not sure what number it is because I stopped clicking because I was, I think, possibly messing up. So sorry to everyone for the tech issues. So back to the content. Thank you for that little tech blurb that I just had to give. So diversity and inclusion, it's really about the company's mission, their strategies, and practices to support a diverse workplace and leverage the effects of inclusion to achieve a competitive business advantage. And in my view, now granted, I'm all about talent acquisition, but I really do believe that success in diversity and inclusion, it has to start with recruiting. So if I go on to the next slide, what I thought would be helpful is just to define what diversity and inclusion is. And there's lots of definitions, but I think this is one that I like it. So I thought I'd walk us through that. So to me, I think of diversity as the who. It's who is around the table, who's being recruited, who's being promoted. Diversity, I think of as any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. And that could be in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, sexual orientation, education, national origin. Like, we could keep going on and on. To me, diversity is about empowering people by respecting and appreciating what makes them different. Okay? And diversity is hopefully a short-term problem, whereas inclusion tends to be a little bit of the longer term. So if I go on to the next slide, inclusion is the how. It's the behaviors, the cultures, and the practices to achieve the benefits of diversity. Inclusion is really an effort and practice in which different groups or individuals who, we have different backgrounds, are culturally and socially accepted and welcomed and treated equally. Inclusion is about that sense of belonging. And inclusive culture is really about making people feel respected and valued for who they are as an individual or a group. And it's about engaging every individual and making sure people feel valued as being essential to the success of the organization. And this is so incredibly, incredibly critical given today's environment. And here's the great thing, is that evidence shows that when people feel valued, they function at full capacity and they feel part of the organization's mission. And this culture shift creates a higher performing organization where motivations and morale soar, which is amazing. So that's, my definition of diversity and inclusion. If we go to the next slide, aptitude research, Madeline found that nearly 90% of companies are concerned with reducing bias in their talent acquisition process, which is huge. But when TA leaders are asked what steps they can take to reduce the bias, a lot of companies focus on training programs. So listen, these programs can provide insights and education, but they're really a box-checking exercise, and because they're not really fundamentally addressing the problem. And because training alone, it's just not the solution. Bias, unfortunately, is human. And so, for me, a lot of recruiting enablement can really help companies expand their talent pools, and debias job descriptions and reduce bias from decision making and personalize the content to support diversity and inclusion efforts. And let me start to give you some examples. So if I go on to the next slide, I just want to give you one more stat because I told you at the beginning I love stats. There is some good news, though, is that 125% more companies are using AI to reduce bias this year than last year. So that's really good. It's still so low. It was 12% last year, and it's up to 27% this year. Again, it's still that 125% increase, but we still have a ways to go because only, not even a third of organizations are using AI to reduce bias. More ways to go, so let me give you some examples of how you can use it. So if we go on to the next slide, I want to talk about debiasing job postings. And so let me just, before I get into the debiasing job posting and the ways it is, let me give you a really interesting stat that I found a few months ago. This was based on recent research from an organization called Great Places to Work. And they discovered that publicly traded companies that were highly diverse and inclusive, they thrived before, during, and after what they were dubbing the Great Recession. So that was in 2008. So anyone who's been around, it's 08, that was an interesting time. I was at Lehman Brothers till the very end. So companies that were highly diverse and had inclusive workplaces gained a 4 times larger stock return on the S&P 500 than companies that didn't. So basically, literally what they found is organizations beat the S&P 500 by 4 times if they had a diverse and inclusive workplace. I mean, it's like a no-brainer. I mean, to not do it, the results are astounding. 4 times. It was incredible. Again, you can go and Google it to get the research. But the important piece is you can't have a highly diverse and inclusive workplace if you don't attract the right candidates into your pipeline and ultimately hire them. So it starts with attracting, and that's where job postings come in. Okay, and so chances are that you are probably using statistically based biased words in your job descriptions without even knowing it. Because I'll tell you something, unconscious bias in language is not always clear or obvious, but it has a huge, huge, huge impact. And gender-neutral job descriptions can literally draw a broader applicant pool. And by the way, it also fills jobs much faster. And so what's interesting and what you see here on this slide is that we do this native in our system at Olio. We actually use data science, and we reveal bias and give suggestions to avoid or balance the use of gender-charged words. So let me give you a real-life example. One of our customers was using this, and they found in their job description that they used the word strong 12 times. 12 times they used the word strong. They didn't even realize, they didn't even notice. And again, it was part of the process, and they were able to quickly see, fix it, and get rid of some bias that was in their job descriptions, what they didn't even realize. So great example of how you can use tech to debias your job posting. So if I go into the next slide, I want to just talk about the real key part is about using data and automation to enhance both quality and diversity. And so we talked about degendering job posting as an example. Again, using the word strong 12 times. That's going to be a turnoff to people. But another great example is around blind screening. And this actually, not everyone realizes this, and some people have been doing this already, but this started happening in the 70s. Actually, there was the New York Philharmonic, and I think it was the Boston Philharmonic. So sorry to use a U.S. example, but they started doing blind auditions. And so what they did was they had a curtain down, they put carpet down, so if women were walking, they wouldn't hear the heels clicking because it was the 70s and everyone was wearing heels and whatnot. And what they found was researchers from Harvard and Princeton actually looked at this, and they found that the blind auditions increased the likelihood that a woman would be hired for the Philharmonic between 25 and 46%. And here's what's really, really interesting. With blind auditions, women became slightly more likely to be hired than men. And here's even the other interesting piece, is that confident that they actually would be treated fairly, when female musicians started applying in greater numbers to the Philharmonic. And that is incredible. They knew it was a fair process. They would be treated equally, so they applied in greater numbers. Let that sink in for a second. If your candidates know that they are going to be treated absolutely fairly in an unbiased way and just looked at for what they can do and what the competencies are, you can attract a more diverse candidate pool. And that is huge. So whether you're doing that by getting rid of names when you look at CVs or other indicators of, someone's, gender, someone's ethnicity, someone's age, that sends that message to candidates that this is a fair process. So that's really key. Okay. And then I have here, a few other ways that you can, think about data and automation to make great and diverse hires. Okay. So if I go on to the next slide, I want to give you one example that's right home in London with the Met Police. And so Met Police is one of our customers, and they use data-driven insights to identify a really big dramatic drop-off for female candidates at the physical assessment stage. And what they found, they wanted to understand why. So they used the data to say, hey, we have a problem, and here's the problem at this exact stage. And what they realized then was that they had content that was showing a male-dominant workforce. And you can imagine as a female, if you're seeing all sorts of content, pictures, examples, it's all males, well, you might feel as a female that, excluded, certainly, they don't want me, maybe intimidated, but it was an issue. So the solution was the Met Police, they redesigned all the content at the stage. They created video content that showed a more inclusive workforce, and they really encouraged women to apply. And they reassured them, they said, you can find success in these roles. And by the way, this was all automated. As I gave some examples earlier, it was completely automated with the content that was delivered. And here was the result. It was incredible. They were able to increase the number of women participating and ultimately passing the assessment by 40%. Huge, huge, huge dramatic change, 40%. That is statistically significant. So again, identify where an issue is, figure out what's the cause, fix it through automation. So hopefully that helps bring that to life a little bit more. So let me just go on to the next slide, and I want to talk about putting your data to work. And again, I said at the beginning, I'm a self-professed data geek. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk about, again, back to research. So I think I had said earlier that 63% said the quality of hire is the greatest challenge. And I think I also mentioned 72% of enterprise companies said using data to automate TA is a priority. So here's the thing, though. If you just make data available in a dashboard, it's not going to drive meaningful adoption. You have to embed it in your operational processes to make it easier to understand and drive adoption by recruiters. Because, listen, I know we are so busy, recruiters are busy. Asking them to go other places, to other systems, to other things, like there's too much going on. It's really hard to get teams to do that. So let me give you an example here. I have a tiny little screenshot, and this is an example of, we have at Olio, our AI will rate candidates and give a recommendation, 1 star to 5 stars. 5 stars, we're saying, hey, you should interview them. 1 star, probably pass. In the middle, take a deeper dive. But it's right there. Recruiters see a list of the candidates. They can see the 5 stars. If they want to click in, they can then see why someone was rated highly. Because, again, there's that trust factor as well, trying to understand and seeing what the competencies are and this and that. And so, again, it's really important. One, you want to use data in decision-making, but it has to be embedded to the process, and hardwiring those insights is key. And again, this hopefully brings us a little bit more to life. So if I go on to the next slide, I thought it'd be helpful just to have a handy checklist to ensure datafication of recruiting. And for me, again, 2 reasons. Reason 1, it's for greater efficiency. It's really removing the workload and all these burdensome steps that we're talking about, but streamlining where data science can make or aid decisions for recruiters. And then it's also for greater effectiveness. You want to inform your decisions with data, drive adoption of the programs and ideas with the data to ultimately improve the quality of hire. So here again, you have a little checklist. You can take a screenshot, picture, think you're getting the slides afterwards. If not, you can find me online and I can send them to you. So again, if we just go to the next slide, I think it's really important, an important point on improvement is, how do you do that? One, just, it's, you got to know your baseline, but the first step is you have to bring together the relevant data for a complete picture. And so let me give you an example. You want to know diversity and female ratios in your talent pipelines, whether that's, candidates or applicants and how they move through all the stages or drop out and who is hired. And, think about comparing by role and location and hiring manager and see where there might be a problem area or a success story. So, again, that was like an example that the Met Police, they did this, right? And then that was the first important step. And then the next one I have here is know your metrics and your analytics. And I get a lot of questions sometimes of like, well, Janette, what's the difference between metrics and analytics? So metrics measure one data point, like the percent of female applicants for a role. It answers the question to what? What's going on? Analytics connect and measure multiple data points, and that answers the question of why. So I'll give you an example. An analytic may show the attributes driving selection of a candidate. In other words, like what is the factor driving the selection of a candidate for a specific role? You could also use it to answer questions like, let's say, why are more white males being selected for a specific role? Or it could show that there is a bias towards maybe a certain educational background, or maybe when a certain hiring manager is involved. Again, it's bringing together and connecting multiple data points. And then once you have all of this, it's really, really important to share insights with the business to gain in and drive change. Okay, so just I'm going to go fly through the next slides. Just really quickly, telling stories with data is really, really important. And how you can present findings to leaderships, that's important. Like you have to be able to tell the story. And so 2 things. So one, I have here on the left, I have a snapshot of just an example of an insight chart that we have at Olio that shows, year over year what's happening with hiring and applications by ethnicity and gender. So it shows that trend. So you can have an interesting story, but you need to be able to bring that to life. And there's this great book, no affiliation with Olio at all. It's called Storytelling with Data. And I think it's really great if that's something that you want to focus on improving. The author is Cole Nussbaum-Knafik, and she has written this fabulous book. And so if you want to take a deeper dive in how you can really tell stories and bring to life, you want to have a beginning, middle, a climax, a big issue, and the end. Again, it's a great way to present to leadership. And then just going to the next slide, here, I just think this is a nice snapshot of recruiting enablement across the life cycle because I think it's just important just to remind everyone, it's not about one area of talent acquisition. It extends from that recruiting marketing efforts all the way to onboarding, and it's the most successful when used throughout the entire process. So, again, just a quick snapshot. And then just last, and maybe I'll just, because I want to leave time for questions, is we can just, flip through the next slide. This is just, a quick overview of the Olio Recruiting Enablement Platform. It's just a recap of what, we believe, a platform consists of. And, that's really where we are. I want to leave time for questions so we can just sort of, hang at some of the ends, and I'll turn it back over to Sam. So I want to leave those 15 minutes for questions that we talked about. So I will sort of pause here, and hopefully this was, helpful and gave everyone a good, sense of, one, what recruiting enablement is, but all those pieces of the agenda of how you can drive better outcomes through process, leveraging the automation, how you can hardwire D&I into recruiting, and then putting the data to work, just bringing it all together. So I know I threw a lot of you guys in the last 15 minutes, so pause. Sam, over to you for questions.
Thanks, Janette. Fantastic presentation. I know we had a few tech issues to overcome there, but yeah, I think a great presentation nonetheless, and a lot of ground covered. So yeah, as you say, we want to leave some time for questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm just going to jump straight in. I've got a really great one here, which I know you talked about a little bit already during the presentation, but someone has said they're concerned about the risks of bias in AI. So how do they address that in the workplace? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that is such a good question, and I get this a lot. I was just talking about this with a global head of TA last week. I think the very first thing I will say is work with the vendors and partners. Don't let the concern around the risk. Don't let it prevent you from using AI. That's my first piece, is don't let it prevent, but what's really important is you need to understand what the vendors you're working with, how they're doing their analysis, and what they are doing to avoid building bias in. So what I mean by that a little bit more is, if you're doing any sort of data analysis, and this, again, I'll use this as an example, but this could be prevalent in AI. It's a bit of, with data, garbage in, garbage out. So if you're putting in information into AI, into a machine learning environment, and that already has biases in it. So think about your process as a recruiting organization. Maybe you don't realize it's unconscious. There may be some, bias in your selection process. There could be. So different organizations and vendors can literally look and tease that out. We've done that with our data scientists and machine learning, and we put up guardrails to prevent any unconscious bias that's been built in. And so, again, it's really important. Understand in detail as much as you can what your vendor partners are doing, how they're doing it, and it'll get you more comfortable. And, you can agree with what they're doing or disagree, but at least you can understand the risk. And I think the other interesting thing that I think about as well is we all, whether we know it or not, have unconscious bias in our process. It's not, automated through AI if you haven't automated yet, but it's there. And so, again, if you can minimize it even from where you are now with AI, even a little bit, you're better, and so let's keep taking those steps, and the tech will get better and better, and AI, but again, it's and there's some really cool stuff that people are doing to really truly take out and minimize the bias as much as possible.
Fantastic. And I think what you've started to touch on a little bit there is how leaders can start to integrate this kind of thing in the workplace themselves, and how they can start to action these things. And I've got another question here which kind of follows on from that, so we're on to a little bit of a theme. So someone wants to know, how challenging is it to integrate something like this? And I think this is more geared towards personnel. So in your opinion, would this require some kind of reskilling or upskilling for talent professionals to start using this in the organization, given that it's such a, potentially for some, it's such a drastic change from the methods they're already used to?
That's a great question. So listen, I think this has created some new roles in the recruiting organization to have some, recruiters who, or team members, maybe it's not whether it's recruiting operations or recruiting data folks who, can start to, again, dig in and understand some of this a bit more. So I think that's part one. I think there's some new jobs, which is great. On the flip side, if, and I'll use this as an example, and we've tried really hard at Olio to do this within our tech, is where I, said a few times, embedding some of, as much as you can into the system to keep it at the fingertips of the recruiter so they don't have to think about, again, is there upskill? Do I need to go somewhere else to understand what does this mean? Now let me try and interpret it and bring it back to my day-to-day job. So I think it's, there's a big piece that's on the tech side to make this as, easy and user-friendly and just like understandable where you don't need training. I mean, to me, if we think about our personal tech that we're all using, whether we have like an iPhone or different apps, like we don't have anyone training us on that. Like we don't really need to be upskilled. I mean, per se, it's just sort of like it comes naturally. Now, granted, maybe not for everyone, but that type of like ease of use is really important. So, that stuff, like if it's just there at the finger, I get this. This makes sense. It's right here. You don't need that training. That to me is the most important piece from a tech standpoint, and something to think about as you're looking at different, partners and vendors. But again, I do think there will be, there are some new jobs that are coming out. Similar to if we think about a few years back, we had some new roles that came out in the talent acquisition space around marketing, right? There was like, talent acquisition marketing groups or, recruiting operations. So it's a mix. So I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but nothing's ever that simple.
No, absolutely. I think that was very comprehensive and, again, covered a lot of ground. But I just want to change topics slightly because I've got another really interesting question here. And I think what this does is comes back a little bit to the theme of how perhaps the social and political climates can affect these kinds of things in the workplace. So we talked a little bit about that in terms of diversity, inclusion, and bias. But of course, I don't need to remind anybody that the other big thing that's going on in the world right now is the pandemic and the coronavirus. So I've got a question here that addresses that a little bit. So with that in mind, how do you think that climate has affected the talent space and affected the way that this kind of technology perhaps needs to be integrated into certain organizations? How do you think that's affected things?
It's a great question. I mean, listen, we're all living and breathing it. With the biggest change, obviously, like we've all seen and we're all figuring out in the past couple of months is moving everything virtual. I mean, the vast majority of everything is moved virtual, whether that's interviews, career fair, everything. So that's been a big big piece. I mean, the other big change is, as I talked to different organizations that they're really, working through is that candidate nurturing is protecting the future pipelines, and also staying in touch with the furloughed employees. And so that's really important when it's time to come back. There's that nurturing. The other piece that, again, a lot of change that we've seen is around, it's like, frankly, reduced, recruiting team sizes. Listen, we're doing more with less. I was talking with the head of TA. He had to, furlough more than half the team. Still wanted to maintain the pipeline of candidates. We had this, I don't want to say funny conversation, but interesting conversation where, senior executive leadership at his organization, knows at some point, and this was, that they're going to end up hiring again. They're going to need to, and they think, like, oh, you can just flip a switch and you have your, candidates right there. You're sort of laughing at that because it's like you have to keep that recruiting pipeline, that candidate pipeline, and nurture candidates. Whether it's not like all of a sudden you turn on the faucet and candidates come for especially for more hard to fill roles with really specific skill sets. You got to keep that pipeline going, and so I think that's a balance that a lot of organizations are really trying to manage. Is fewer recruiters, and still just as much to do. So it's we'll get through it. I mean, I will say, for me, and I was talking to I think I mentioned I was on Wall Street for many years. I was doing recruiting in year 2000, September 11th, and then again through Lehman Brothers, 2008, and now we have this, and so this is crazy and more intense than the past two ups and downs. We will come out of this. It will take time, but it's it's just a matter of time. So, I feel like it's for some of us veterans who've been doing this many years, it's not all, peaches and cream, but we're going to get through this and we'll be stronger. And there's a lot of good lessons to learn from, things over the years. So that's my feel good answer to your question. but I do believe it.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And I'd just like to move on to something else, which is, it sounds like somebody's basing this on something that's happening in their own organization, and they're looking for advice in terms of how to action this. So they've said, we've slowed down our hiring and we're moving people into different roles. So how are you seeing tech help with that?
Oh, that's a good question. And we've definitely seen that. And so what we've done is we've actually helped a number of our customers set up redeployment career portals. And so, that's helped a lot as is shifting, the workforce to different areas where there is a need in your organization. And so, we found there's really huge value in, configuring the workflows and tailoring it. Obviously using data, with really that lens on internal movement, it's slightly different than obviously external candidates because you have so much information about your employees and your teams. And so that's really been, helpful as we've been trying to work with our customers on, helping them through this time period.
Wonderful. And I think just since we're just about to run out of time, I'll put one more question to you. This is a nice simple one here. So do you have any tips for dealing with applications in huge volumes?
Oh, yes. That's the big thing. Like no black holes, So, the short answer is automation. It's just, don't throw out great candidates by not looking through them. And obviously we can't look through them. There's only I forget, it's like, a human takes however many seconds to look at a CV or application. And obviously we should take more than that, but, so there's only so much we can get through, but through automation and data, get through everyone, have them at least all looked at to pinpoint those top ones. But, it's like, to me, there's nothing worse than, the black hole of recruiting, but automation can really, really help. So that's my short answer, knowing we're getting up to the top of the hour. So, and I'm happy, to answer if anyone wants to find me. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. I think I had that up earlier on. If people want to, reach out, I'm around.
Fantastic. Right. Well, thanks, Janette. Some really amazing insights all around there. Like I said, I think a lot of ground covered and a lot of really important issues touched on. But I think by my watch, we're about 1 minute short of the hour. So I think that brings us to the end of today's session. I'd just like to finish off by extending a big thank you to Olio and to Janette Meister for the amazing presentation. And of course, to all of you at home for tuning in with us. I should let you know that if you would like to revisit this session or perhaps share it with colleagues, then you can absolutely do so on demand and in full at hrdconnect.com. And whilst you're there, make sure to subscribe for plenty more content on HR, business, and the future of work. Finally, if you do have any particular thoughts or feedback about today's session, please do complete our survey and let us know. And we do hope you'll join us for the next HRD webinar. Until then, goodbye.